America faces a big choice on November the 5th.
And we who believe in reproductive freedom.
He says, you're not going to be a dictator, are you? I said, no, other than day one.
Perhaps the most important election in recent history is too close to call. But whatever happens on election day, and in the weeks that follow, the America that we thought we knew is gone, and it isn't coming back.
It's the enemy from within, all the scum that we have to deal with.
Join me, Dr. Emma Shortis, on After America as we discuss the final weeks of the campaign and how this election will change our world forever. After America is brought to you by the Australia Institute. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
I think the lesson is policy matters, and that people that want to win votes should listen to what voters are interested in, and if they think it's a good idea that they can fix, they should step in and do something. If we want people to have faith in democracy, we have to show them that democracy can deliver them nice things.
One for mum, one for dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows. I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute. It was meant to be a total wipeout.
Disgruntled senior figures within the Labor Party are working to have Anastasia Palaszczuk stand aside as Queensland Premier, fearing she cannot win next year's election.
Stephen Miles will be the next Premier of Queensland after Health Minister Shannon Fentiman withdrew her bid.
Stephen Miles has made a gobsmacking admission, confessing his government's headed for an election wipeout come October.
Well, this confirms what we've known for some time, that the most likely outcome in October is that David Crisafulli will be the new Premier.
For a while on Saturday night, it even looked like a hung parliament was possible.
It looked like it was white-knuckle time for the LNP.
Watching the results tonight, it is clear that that hasn't been enough to secure a majority of seats for Labor. And also that the LNP is unlikely to have a majority.
But when the dust settled, Queensland voted in a new LNP government, albeit by a much narrower margin than many predicted.
They have voted for a fresh start, and they have voted for a majority LNP government.
According to Australia Institute polling, the Miles government's progressive policies were really popular with the public and may have prevented a political annihilation like Labor experienced in the 2012 election, when it won just 7 of 89 seats. So what happened in Queensland and what might it mean for federal politics ahead of the next election? Joining me to talk to these questions is our Executive Director, Richard Dennis. G'day, Richard.
Hey, Eb.
So, Richard, analysts were predicting a total wipeout for Labor very recently, which had been in power for about 30 of the last 35 years in what we know is one of Australia's most conservative states. Were you surprised by how close it got?
Yeah, I was, especially on the night, and we can maybe talk about this later, but there's clearly a big difference between the votes cast on the day and the pre-polls, and that suggests to me the campaign, the longer it went on, the more people changed their mind and voted Labor. So, yeah, certainly early in the night, there was some pretty nervous-looking Liberals. They've got majority now, and we're still counting. We'll talk about that later too. But I think a lot of people in Labor were very, very happy about it on the night.
Yeah, so the Australian Institute did some polling on Queensland's Labor election platform, and we saw Stephen Miles, the former Premier, really throwing a lot out in the campaign and the lead up to it, including things like 50-cent public transport fares, free school lunches, and limiting petrol price increases. What did that polling find?
Overwhelming support. The idea of populism is often used as a derisive term, but, in democracy, popularism's a lot better than unpopularism. Like, the whole point of government is we put our people to represent us in the parliament to decide, what we should do together. And Stephen Miles did some very popular things. He increased tax on the coal industry and he increased spending on public transport, as you said, making fares 50 cent. He spent a lot of money converting, for example, old hotels into crisis accommodation, public housing. And, he was offering free lunches to kids in the middle of a cost of living crisis. All of these things were very popular, all of them polling over 80% public support. And if we want people to have faith in democracy, if we want people to care, it's great that different parties are putting different ideas out there in election campaigns. We don't all have to agree on them, but the worst thing would be if all the parties were offering the same things. And similarly, the idea that it's a criticism that a party's doing something that is popular, well, in what world in a democracy is it a bad thing for governments to listen to people, listen to the problems they've got, and put up solutions?
So you talked there about the fact that there was a bit of a difference between pre-poll and polling on the day. So I guess the question is, if these policies are popular with the public, why did Labor ultimately end up losing the election?
Oh, well, going into the election, Labor was clearly unpopular with the electorate. When Anastasia Palaszczuk stepped down, most people thought she stepped down because she thought she had no chance of winning the next election. All the polling this year, not that there'd been that much, had sort of suggested that was true. And look, in democracy, people do like change from time to time, and Labor has been in power, for most of the last 3 decades. So I think there were all sorts of factors weighing against Labor, and clearly the Liberals won the election. So clearly more people voted Liberal than Labor. What I'm saying is that what our polling shows is that a lot of the ideas Stephen Miles put up were very popular in the electorate, and he did better on the night than people expected him to do. So I don't think it's hard to conclude that having spent months prosecuting the case for popular policy and doing better in the election than people thought, I don't think it's hard to draw the conclusion that those big popular ideas of his helped win votes for his government.
Federal Greens leader Adam Bandt made a statement after the election, more or less accusing the Labor Party of being more focused on fighting the Greens than the LNP. What's your response to that?
Oh, look, it's politics. As it's a contest. It's a contest of ideas. It's a contest of political strategy, and there's only one winner. I mean, if I were the Greens, I'd think it's a badge of honour that they're big enough and important enough now that major parties put effort into fighting to win seats off them. I mean, by definition, they only fight to take seats off you if you've won them in the past. So, it's okay for people to have hurt feelings after elections, but I don't know that it's a damning indictment on the Labor Party or any party that they spent the election trying to win votes off a competitor. That said, let's be clear, the idea that Labor are sort of terribly excited about the Greens losing their seats and the Greens being wiped out, to be clear, in Brisbane, they held a former Liberal seat and a former Labor seat. So when the Greens are winning Liberal seats, as they have done in many states, it's not really helping Labor for the Greens to lose seats back to the Liberals, for example. So, be careful what you wish for, progressive Australia.
So there's been a long-term trend of Australia's major party vote declining, and we've seen vote counts become increasingly complex with 3- and 4-pronged contests in some electorates. And you noticed this in the seat of South Brisbane. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's panning out?
Oh, yes. Just let me do an Anthony Green and pull my numbers up here, Ed. So these numbers were only updated 12 minutes ago. But yeah, look, at the moment, if you went to the AEC website, if you went to the ABC website, you'd see the ABC saying that Labor are likely to win back the seat of South Brisbane from the Greens' Amy McMahon. And if you went to the ABC site, you'd see that it's got Labor on 57%, two-party preferred, and the Greens on 43%. So not just won back a seat from the Greens, but boy, that's
a
blowout. But if you read the dot points, which I encourage people to do, or you understand how preferential voting works, you'd understand that the race is much tighter than that and much more interesting than that. So let me just go through the numbers as we sit here at 12:30 on a Tuesday. So this is the seat where the Greens got wiped out, right? Well, they came first in the poll. They polled 35.1% at the moment, latest numbers. That's a small swing against them, so they won't be happy about that. Their vote's down 2.8%. But the Greens topped the poll in South Brisbane on 35.1%. Second comes Labor on 31.9%. Third comes the Liberals on 29.7%. And fourth comes One Nation on 3.3%. So that's all right. Everyone's forgotten all those numbers already. It's very hard to talk about data on a podcast. But here's what's interesting. The Greens have come first. Labor's come second. The Libs have come third. One Nation's come fourth. And the ABC website is sort of saying, likely Labor win. I don't think it's likely. It's possible. Here's what's going to happen. When all the votes have been collected, what happens with a preferential count is you figure out who came last, and you literally get the pile of people, who voted for the person who came last, and you redistribute their votes according to their second preference. Now, what we've got here is One Nation are going to come fourth on 3.3% of the vote. Now, if most of the One Nation voters preference the Liberals, which I think is a likely outcome, then the One Nation vote at the moment plus the Liberal vote would get you to 33%, which is more than the Labor Party on 31.9. So once the Liberals get ahead of Labor, then we've excluded One Nation. We started with 4, they're gone. The most likely thing is it's going to be Greens 1, Liberal plus One Nation preferences 2, Labor 3. And when Labor is third, their votes will be allocated according to their preferences. Most of the Labor preferences will flow to the Greens, in which case the Greens will win. So what we're sitting here looking at is, I wonder if enough One Nation voters are going to preference Labor such that Labor can beat the Greens, even though the Greens kind of top the poll.
Yeah.
Now, there's nothing dodgy about this. It's just complicated and interesting. And all of this detail is lost on the night, with Anthony Green getting all confused saying, it's a bit hard, the computer's not working.
And on the initial counts, it can look like, a massive gap that in the end, when you look at the data, it's much closer than that might appear.
And again, the Greens had a swing against them. That's not a great result for them, but they may well win this seat. And we won't know until all the votes are counted and the preferences are distributed. And it's actually going to be close. It's going to come down to 100 votes.
Yeah.
But if you look at the website, today it would suggest it's very comfortably Labor.
Queensland is one of several states that have banned nuclear power. The state LNP says it won't repeal those laws if elected.
Peter knows my position on it.
How is this playing out in Queensland? Because the state party is saying something different.
Well, friends can disagree, PK. That can happen. And
big is the disagreement, Scott?
But David Christoffel made it very clear.
No, it's not part of our plan.
Said nuclear isn't part of the plan now. If you win government in October...
No. I've got to be really clear. It's not part of our plan.
New Premier David Christoffel has publicly objected to Peter Dutton's nuclear power proposal. How big a problem is this for the federal opposition leader, not only as he tries to sell his signature energy policy, but if he gets elected, implementing it?
Yeah. Look, before I answer that, we got to understand that the only reason the LNP are talking about nuclear is they don't want to talk about renewables and they don't want to talk about climate change. Peter Dutton's not stupid. The whole time he was in cabinet, the whole time the Liberals were in power, they didn't try to build a nuclear power station.
Not even one.
Not even one. Not a single, nary a one, as my grandmother would have once said. They know, but now that they're in opposition, they're not stupid, they're smart, and they don't want to have a fight with the Teals about climate targets. They don't want to have a fight with Labor about who should have the most ambitious renewable energy target. So they've thrown a dead cat on the table. They've said, I don't want to talk about targets. I don't want to talk about fossil fuels. I don't want to talk about renewables. I want to talk about nuclear. And every time someone tries to talk about things that we could do, the Liberals are like, I've got this nuclear distraction over here. So they're not stupid. That's why after months of talking about it, they put out a 2-page press release with no detail. So what will happen now? Well, yes, one of the problems for Peter Dutton is that you can only build, the federal government is going to need the permission of the states to build a nuclear power station in the states. Now, historically, the Conservatives were the party of states' rights, and the Conservatives historically didn't like federal governments telling states what to do. Well, Peter Dutton, of course, ignores all of that and just says, I'll just tell the states what to do. So in the short term, we're set up for a bit of a fight between Dutton pretending he's going to build a nuclear power station in Queensland and needing to look like he means it. And Christoffel going to need to look like he's standing up for Queensland and saying, not on my watch, you won't. Now, why I'm slightly worried about this is because it just means we're going to spend more time talking about the dead cat of nuclear that's not going to happen. But yes, for anyone who's actually interested in solving Australia's energy issues, for anyone who's actually interested in cost of living, for anyone who's actually interested in climate change, the more we watch a fight between Dutton and Crisafulli about nuclear power, the less scrutiny we're putting on the Liberals for why they won't actually support things that we need to do. So as a distraction, I think Dutton will milk it. But for anyone who thinks Dutton's taking this seriously, they have to take seriously the fact that the new Queensland Premier said, yeah, not going to happen.
Another thing that I wonder if it will end up becoming a problem for the coalition, reproductive rights became a big issue in the Queensland election after independent MP Robbie Katter said he'd attempt to wind back access to abortion, which has been legalised right across Australia. And it's pretty clear that the federal LNP don't really want to talk about this issue, but Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price broke ranks last week, more or less saying she can't agree with later term abortions. So I'm just wondering, are we seeing kind of the importation of US culture wars into Australian politics? And do we think this will become an issue for the coalition in the federal election?
Look, to be clear, yes, that's exactly what's happening. We're just it's embarrassing, really. Like, of all the culture wars to have, we can't even invent our own. We're just bringing them straight in from the US, and to the incredible distress of a lot of Australians, incredibly unnecessary. But as we saw in Queensland, I think very unhelpful for Liberal or LNP candidates. So, yes, it's interesting that when Senator Price came out and said that, a few of her female colleagues kind of quickly went, oh, no, that's not the case. It's not a federal issue at all. Well, it can be a federal issue. Indeed, the LNP were talking about it in federal parliament a few months ago. At the national level, people bring up things like Medicare funding. So there are federal implications and there are levers the federal government can pull. But I think what's fascinating was that even in the middle of a Queensland election, after Senator Price's colleagues tried to say, oh, nothing to see here, Barnaby Joyce came out with the bellows and started to say, no, she's got a point and, I'm on her side and I want to stand up for it. So there are clearly these deep divisions within conservative politics in Australia. Once upon a time, the Liberal Party prided itself on its libertarian principles, and the so-called wet Liberals that people don't talk about anymore were the Libertarians in the Liberal Party who didn't like big government and wanted free markets because it, got government out of our lives. But the coalition is this kind of strange group. It had some libertarians in it, and it had a whole bunch of Christian conservatives in it who absolutely wanted to tell people how to live their lives. Now, it's the conservatives who are dominant in the modern Liberal Party, but the problem is voters are far more libertarian, particularly on things like reproductive rights, than the coalition party room. So, yeah, I think it's quite a risk for Peter Dutton that his own colleagues end up having this fight, because regardless of the fight they have in Parliament, I think there's no fight out there in the community. There's a very small but noisy audience that really wants to tell women what they can and can't do with their bodies.
So back to lessons from the Queensland election. It's not too long now until we have a federal election. What, lessons, if any, what trends are there? What implications, if any, are there for the federal election from the Queensland results?
Well, good question. Also, we've got a WA state election coming up, so another parochial resource state, so to speak. Look, let's look at the numbers. The One Nation did terribly, won no seats, very small vote. Katter, Australia's party, won a few seats. The Katter vote plus One Nation vote, last time I looked, was smaller than the Green vote. So in conservative Queensland, allegedly conservative Queensland, that's had Labor governments for most of the last 3 decades, there's more Green voters than there are extreme right voters. So that's sort of one thing. The other thing, I think, is that policies matter and election campaigns matter. Polls don't fall from the sky like rain that they tell us what's going to happen. Leaders of political parties can help shape their own destiny. And I think that there's a clear lesson for politicians from any side that what Stephen Miles did from day one of becoming Premier of Queensland was try to win. And there was nothing small target about it. There was a clear strategy to what he was doing. He was launching a wide range of progressive policies funded by an increase in tax on the coal industry, and he was clearly chasing Brisbane seats. And it's hilarious to watch commentators say, well, it didn't work because he didn't win any seats outside of Brisbane. He knew what he was doing. He thought, I got some chance of saving some furniture, and the furniture I can save is here in Brisbane. So 50-cent public transport, better public housing, restrictions on petrol stations, free lunches. Like he had a target in mind, and the results suggest he hit it. So in the lead up to the West Australian election and the federal election, I think the lesson is policy matters, and that people that want to win votes should listen to what voters are interested in. And if they think it's a good idea that they can fix, they should step in and do something. If we want people to have faith in democracy, we have to show them that democracy can deliver them nice things.
Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thanks, Eb.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on the show today, and you can reach out to us via email at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can find us on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.